This is VOA Africa.
Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Thursday, June 25th. This is Africa 54. Due to the global outbreak of COVID-19, Voice of America is taking every necessary precaution to safeguard its employees. So our broadcast will look a little different today and in the near future as we, out of an abundance of caution, reduce our staffing at VOA headquarters here in Washington. We're working to help keep you informed about what's going on, and we appreciate your staying with us on Africa 54. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa says violence against women and girls is the country's second pandemic. The nation has one of the world's highest rates of rape and murder, and several recent brutal killings is enraging the nation. But activists say they need to see real change, not just words from leaders to protect victims. VOA's Anita Powell spoke with women and girls who have survived this plague of violence and reports from Johannesburg.
Like a lot of teenagers, Thembekile dreams big. But since she was raped earlier this year by a man in this impoverished part of Johannesburg, this 13-year-old's dreams have turned dark.
I want to be a sound engineer and a lawyer. I just feel like my dreams are shattered. Nothing will be good for me again.
She's one of countless South African girls and women who fall prey every day to what President Cyril Ramaphosa described as a war of gender-based violence.
As a man, as a husband, and as a father to daughters, I am appalled at what is no less than a war that is being waged against the women and the children of our country.
Police statistics show that a woman is murdered every 3 hours. Official statistics on sexual assault may not show the full scope of the problem, researchers say, because many victims don't report the incident to police. Given Sikakwe, who works with nonprofit organization Sonke Gender Justice, says patriarchy, the belief that men rule in the family and society, is the main culprit. He praised Ramaphosa for his strong words, but said that it's the seemingly innocent ones that cause problems.
A lot of comments, for example, that are made at home seem quite innocuous. But there's nothing innocuous if you're operating in a system like patriarchy, where to show your strength, you need to beat up someone. I'm particularly worried about the seemingly harmless behavior that we I suppose we promote in our homes, because that, for me, we are indirectly forming ticking time bombs.
17-year-old Aquilene Shaku says she's seen how words can hurt.
Like last week, when my dad came home, I don't know what happened. So he started shouting at my mom and swearing at her. So I went out and cried because I didn't think it was something that could happen to me. I thought, not at first I thought that gender-based violence is about physical abuse only. But then when I realized how my mom has been emotionally abused, it broke me apart, because now she's part of that struggle of trying to fight to get out of that kind of relationship, but my dad doesn't allow her to go.
Thokozani Ndaba founded this organization for girls in this slum-like neighborhood. She says that while women and girls of all backgrounds are affected by gender-based violence, she started the program here because it's particularly lacking in resources.
There was an 11-year-old who was raped in 2018, and she gave birth to an HIV-positive child, and she was positive. And in 2018, how is that possible? So this is how the program started. We have an after-school program where after school they can come here, because the only thing that's around, you saw all those men drinking at 10 in the morning. There's nothing, there's no hope. It's a dire situation, and all they know is grab the young people that they see around and rape them and destroy their lives, because their lives are already destroyed.
Ndaba, like many activists, is calling for harsher penalties for sexual assault. Thembekile agrees. She recently learned, when she saw him on the street, that the man who raped her was released on bail. That provoked a tailspin of emotions.
Do you think he should go to jail for a long time?
Yes, I think so, because there are a lot of girls, there are a lot of women in this area. Why didn't he go to some women then to come to me? Like, there are a lot of girls and women, like, who he could be in the relationship with them, not to come and rape me.
But these young women say they will not let their assailants redefine their lives or their dreams. Anita Powell, VOA News, Johannesburg.
Roughly 280,000 refugees from Africa live in Yemen, and they are among the poorest, most vulnerable people in the world. Aid organizations say during this COVID-19 pandemic, international resources to support them have dwindled to almost nothing, and families say they are barely surviving, choosing to potentially expose themselves to the virus rather than starve. Heather Murdoch reports from Istanbul with Nasser Shekar in Sana'a, Yemen.
Imagine living in a place so difficult and dangerous that you felt you had to flee to Yemen, one of the poorest countries in the world, embroiled in war and plagued with acute malnutrition and diseases like cholera. And then imagine this. As a refugee in Yemen, suddenly everything got worse.
The pandemic has impacted us so much. My mother does not have a regular job, but she cleans houses, even now, during the coronavirus. But some people won't open the door. They tell her to leave or insult her.
Yemen hosts the second largest number of Somali refugees in the world, after Kenya. But aid workers say international funds to support them are being diverted to other needs as the world's economy reels under the pandemic. Over the summer, the United Nations Refugee Agency says it may run out of cash and shelters for refugees and have to fire about 1,500 local staff at a time when Yemenis are suffering financially. Families say the pandemic is making everyone poorer, which is potentially spreading the virus.
If my mother stays at home, she cannot feed us. But if she goes to work, this may bring the coronavirus into our home.
Yemen has a relatively small number of reported COVID-19 cases, less than 1,000 as of June 24th. But aid groups say the real number may be much higher and growing. Measures to prevent the disease from spreading in Yemen are limited, with no way for many people to follow social distancing guidelines or keep clean. A large-scale outbreak in Yemen would be impossible to contain, aid workers say, with thousands of hospitals destroyed in 5 years of war and severe shortages of even the most basic medical equipment. Heather Murdoch, VOA News in Istanbul with Nasir Shaker in Sana'a.
World Health Organization Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus says the number of coronavirus cases worldwide could reach 10 million next week, a sharp increase from the 9.3 million cases currently reported. Latin America is now the world's newest COVID-19 epicenter, with the regional death toll surpassing 100,000, with more than half in Brazil, nearly 54,000, according to Johns Hopkins University. The United States continues to lead the world in infections with more than 2.3 million, or about 25% of all worldwide cases. The U.S. also continues to be the leader in coronavirus fatalities with more than 121,000. Now to Africa, where Senegalese President Macky Sall, on the advice of doctors, is self-quarantining on Thursday as a precaution after coming in contact with someone who tested positive for COVID-19, according to a statement issued by his office late Wednesday. Senegal is reporting more than 6,000 coronavirus infections and at least 93 deaths. South Africa is taking part in Africa's first human trials aimed at producing a potential vaccine against COVID-19, which continues to surge in the country. Oxford University, in conjunction with South Africa's University of Witwatersrand, announced that thousands of volunteers between the ages of 18 and 65 who received the vaccination will be monitored for 12 months to see how well the vaccine guards against coronavirus. South Africa, which is gradually relaxing lockdown restrictions, has the highest rate of infections in Africa, with more than 100,000 cases and more than 2,000 deaths. Spikes in coronavirus cases in countries that appeared to have largely contained it are leading to new concerns amid a debate over the easing of lockdowns. Scientists are looking at whether the virus could have been imported by travelers or whether it is being spread by asymptomatic people. VOA's Mariama Diallo reports.
The head of the Center for Disease Control in China claims there may have been asymptomatic cases well before the first instances of the new outbreak, also traced to a Whole Food market, were recently discovered. The 25 new cases China says were reported last Friday in Beijing were among 32 nationwide, 4 of them in Chinese citizens who had returned from overseas, according to official reports. There is a discussion by Chinese doctors over whether the DNA of COVID-19 in the Beijing outbreak is of a European strain.
They do know that the genetic characteristics of the organism in Beijing at this time are different from Beijing a few months ago, which is to do with the organism having mutated.
Chinese officials say containment measures have slowed the momentum of the outbreak, which the government has said infected more than 200 people since earlier in June. In Europe, Germany has also seen a spike in cases after more than 1,500 people at a meatpacking plant had tested positive for the new coronavirus. New lockdown restrictions are being imposed until the end of June as German Red Cross workers in hazmat suits went door to door in Gütersloh on Tuesday to undertake mass testing.
Intensive testing will give us a better picture of the situation.
The news comes as officials in New Zealand reported disappointing news the country was no longer free of the new coronavirus after 2 women who flew from London to see a dying parent had tested positive. Dr. Mike Ryan heads the World Health Organization's emergencies program.
It is a challenge for all countries, and I think South Korea with other countries demonstrate that even when you get down to very low incidence, you still have to have a very strong public health surveillance system, and you still have to have a very capable public health infrastructure.
Global infections surpassed 9 million this week as Brazil and India grappled with an outbreak in cases, and other hard-hit countries reported new surges, including in some parts of the United States. Mariama Diallo, VOA News.
The current unemployment rate in the U.S. is just over 13%, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. While overall new claims for unemployment insurance benefits are declining and some states have reopened their economies, unemployment remains at record high, causing hardship especially among African Americans and Hispanics. VOA's Julie Tabo reports.
Gary Connell took a risk in early March when he opened his own hair salon in Montgomery County, Maryland. His business had been up and running for less than a month when stay-at-home orders were put in place to slow the spread of the coronavirus, forcing him to close. Now, even though he was able to reopen in early June after the state loosened restrictions, Connell's economic hardship is far from over.
2.5 months I'm back. I'm on rent. I'm back on the phone. You're upside down now. You know? You're upside down.
The coronavirus pandemic has disproportionately hurt minority populations.
We have higher levels of unemployment for Black Americans and Hispanics, relatively lower unemployment for whites.
African American businesses were hit especially hard, experiencing a 41% drop in business, according to the National Bureau of Economic Research. Alfonso Cross is co-owner of an Atlanta, Georgia bar that recently reopened after being closed since mid-March.
Right now, you have this particular COVID scenario deeply affecting economically African American communities because they were never set up to win to begin with. By operating in a part of town that is underdeveloped as other parts of town, you now are setting that business owner up for failure when there are economic downturns.
Experts say the pandemic has exposed existing racial disparities.
African American businesses come to the pandemic smaller, less substantially capitalized, less of a reserve in cash and money, and therefore harder to weather the storm.
Meanwhile, the unemployment rate of Latinos nationwide has jumped to nearly 18%, according to U.S. government statistics, the highest of any group.
We have no money, we have no food, and came here to get something.
I have not had any income since last day of March. and I'm just like trying to survive this.
While several states have begun to reopen their economies, allowing some businesses to hire more people, experts say no one should expect a quick rebound.
This is a social problem of a significant magnitude, and I think that as these numbers continue to flood out, showing the number of unemployed being at essentially unthinkable levels, elected officials are going to have to pass another round of legislation.
In the meantime, what's called for now, says business owner Gary Connell, is endurance.
As an entrepreneur, you have to be patient, man. You have to be patient and believe.
Julie Tabo, VOA News.
We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also, check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Coming up, Ethiopia's quest for more electricity turns into a major regional dispute. We'll be right back.
Hello, I'm Linor Moudou, your VOA health correspondent.
As you know, more than 2 months
During the COVID-19 pandemic, the World Health Organization says most people who get COVID-19 have mild or moderate symptoms and can recover with proper supportive care. If you have a cough, fever, and difficulty breathing, seek immediate medical care. If you have fever and live in an area with malaria or dengue, seek medical care immediately. For more information on COVID-19, visit who.int or contact your local or national health authorities.
Florida has hit a grim milestone this week as the number of COVID-19 cases in the U.S. state passed 100,000 and more than 3,000 people have died. Despite the spike in infections, Florida entered phase 2 of its reopening with non-essential businesses working at 50% capacity and beaches remaining open. Lilia Anisimova has our story, narrated by Anna Rice.
Alex Jugon owns several restaurants and what used to be a successful catering business in Florida. He worked weddings and large corporate events and hoped to expand when the coronavirus pandemic hit the U.S.
The restaurant business was a hot industry. Everything was great. 2020 was supposed to be a record year for us. There were lots of tourists, people were spending money and eating out. Not cooking at home turned into a trend.
Today, in this pandemic world, Jugon's restaurants are following regulations. They work at 50% capacity and all employees are wearing gloves and face masks.
People started to come back to order carryout and deliveries. But a lot of restaurants closed, so the ones that survived are now earning a little more than they should have. Now there's less competition. We do temperature checks for our employees daily, ask them to wash their hands regularly, to wear face masks and gloves, and change those often as well.
People coming to this restaurant say they are grateful for the gradual reopening.
I'm not afraid to go to restaurants. I'm more afraid places will close. I'm tired of staying at home and tired of cooking.
When in mid-June the number of COVID-positive cases started to rise in Florida, local authorities linked it to the increase of people being tested, more than 1.6 million since the start of the pandemic. But epidemiologists say more tests aren't the most likely reason for the rise in the number of cases.
I think that the uptick in cases in Florida is a real signal, and it's likely that their epidemic is growing. And, you know, that uptick seems to have started towards the end of May. And so I expect that we will see the resulting deaths from those initial infections occurring towards the end of June.
Authorities are worried it might mean the start of a second coronavirus wave in Florida. As a result, Carlos Jimenez, mayor of the Miami-Dade County, is requiring residents to wear face masks in public, both indoors and outdoors, and urged people to practice social distancing.
The fate of the economy is really in the hands of consumer perception. I don't think Florida has been unduly irresponsible. On the other hand, the fact is that it is a tourist-driven economy that is a very, very high part of the state economy. And to have those businesses that serve that part of the economy shut down interminably would be very, very difficult for the politicians of the state to endure.
All states that are now slowly easing their way out of strict lockdowns have to balance recovering of the economy with safety, a job that is proving to be extremely hard. For Lilia Anisimova in Miami, Florida, Anna Rice, VOA News.
As Nigerian churches emerge from COVID-19 lockdown to once again hold weddings, they're still trying to practice social distancing and cut down on the number of guests. The ongoing coronavirus pandemic is leading many couples to get married online through video conferencing platforms. Timothy Obiezu reports from Abuja.
A joyful day for Nigeria's newly married Matthew and Peace Udokomasi, despite holding their wedding under intense COVID-19 cautions.
My family is very large. I have my other sisters in Lagos, with all of them. Those they can't come. Those in Lagos couldn't come. My twin sisters in Lokoja, she couldn't come.
That I have told myself I was going to entertain the public with dance. And in fact, that is the only thing I am regretting, because there is no music, there is nothing.
Most Nigerian churches reopened in early June after authorities lifted the ban on religious gatherings, but are treading carefully. During Peace and Matthew's wedding, only 15 people, including the couple and officiating pastors, were allowed into the auditorium. Guests, including family members and friends, witnessed the occasion streaming online from their homes, and some, such as Dennis Dogo, just outside the church premises.
From the gate, we were stopped. But while outside, we connected via online.
The wedding industry is big business in Nigeria, but the coronavirus pandemic is changing how businesses that support the industry operate. Event planners such as Victor Onyekwere are trying to cope.
It's tough for us, especially the event industry, because we are the first set of people that it hit. Because first thing first, no events. There is a total ban on events. That was the first thing that happened. And that being, with that, it put a stop to all activities with respect to events. So everybody in the event industry right now is going through a lot.
To manage the situation, Victor and his team planned what was known as Nigeria's first online wedding, but things are not the same.
Business is not as usual. It's different now, and truth be told, we can't wait for things to go back to normal. Planning a Zoom wedding it has its own side, and it has definitely, you have to be with small guest size. And the truth is, you can't have that real, feeling when you are planning a real wedding with everybody on ground. You're seeing, everybody there.
However, some couples such as the Udokomasis, who are thinking about safety and cost, are embracing the concept of online weddings if they want to get married anytime soon. Timothy Obiezu for VOA News, Abuja.
Tensions over moving forward with the filling of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam has reached the United Nations Security Council. However, Ethiopia says it plans to start filling the hydroelectric dam on the Blue Nile next month. William Davison, the International Crisis Group senior analyst for Ethiopia, spoke to VOA's Salem Solomon and begins by explaining the role the international community has played so far.
The latest situation is that the process is now focused around the United Nations Security Council. And that's because negotiations resumed on the 9th of June, but then they broke up again on the 17th of June without an agreement. And just a couple of days later, Egypt wrote its second letter to the Security Council, this time asking for an urgent meeting on the matter and calling the GERD and the situation around it as a potential threat to international peace and security. Ethiopia has replied, rejecting all of these allegations. But the point is, at the moment, we're not in the negotiations, and instead it's this sort of process of diplomatic escalation. And it was in the aftermath of the latest breakdown of negotiations that we had this intervention from the National Security Council in a tweet. I think it should be noted we haven't seen too many other signs of a US government taking a position in the last few days. So at the moment, the tweet is somewhat isolated. But the claim and the position that the NSC seemed to be expressing there was something along the lines of the Egyptian position, that it was Ethiopian intransigence which has prevented the parties from coming to an agreement. Now, as you can imagine, there's a great deal of claim and counterclaim over that. But what we can say is that in the last round of negotiations, the issue that the process most prominently stumbled on was legal issues, and that was relating to whether the agreement that they were trying to sign is going to be legally binding or not. Now, there's a lot more detail behind that, but essentially Egypt and Sudan disagreed, opposed the Ethiopian position that it would not be a fully binding international treaty.
Why has it escalated to this level? And would taking it to the Security Council resolve the issue?
There's two ways of answering that. One would be to explain what Egypt's trying to do. The other would be to give my own crisis group's view on it. I think obviously what Egypt is trying to do is to rally as much international support for its position, including most prominently and most obviously from the US government. It seems to think that international pressure, whether from the UNSC or whether from related activity stemming from it being raised internationally, Egypt seems to think that that will either get Ethiopia to pause its filling plans or get Ethiopia to sign an agreement, which it otherwise was not willing to do. Now, as far as we are concerned at Crisis Group, there is no evidence for that. There is no suggestion that Ethiopia is not going to fill the Renaissance Dam, to start filling the Renaissance Dam next month. There is also no sign, no clear sign that Ethiopia is willing to submit to increased international pressure on this matter. And in fact, there are plenty of signs that Ethiopia is set up, is in the mood to resist any further international pressure on this matter, because of course we saw plenty of pressure from the US government earlier in the year. So Egypt is following a policy of diplomatic escalation to try and increase the pressure, but it isn't really clear to outside observers why they think that that is going to be a successful strategy given their stated aims here.
That was VOA Salem Solomon speaking with William Davison, International Crisis Group Senior Analyst for Ethiopia. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thank you for watching.